Hey now, all you fans of everything Halloween and horror, it is Black Metal Werewolf making a brand new spooky video for you this week. And today we are going to be talking about horror movies. Now for many of us, horror movies is one of the biggest parts of Halloween, and we all try to cram in watching as many of them as we possibly can all throughout the month of October. And we all love a good, long-lasting horror franchise. One of the great things about horror movies is usually they are relatively cheap to produce. Therefore, sequel after sequel can be made in quick succession, and they usually get a lot more profit than what they invested into it. And though that is somewhat of a benefit, we do need to acknowledge that it is a bit of a double-edged sword. When you have a franchise that has lasted for so long, possibly even decades, with countless sequels, the stories can get bogged down with convoluted plots and inconsistencies. You get different writers, directors, producers, all these people throwing in new ideas and plot twists. It leaves us fans scratching our heads as to what the hell is going on. So that is why we are going to be focusing on some of the biggest inconsistencies in horror movie franchises. Let's start out with one of the biggest horror franchises of them all, Halloween. Now I know as the series progressed we got into the Thorn trilogy, then the reboots and the remakes, but I want to focus on one main thing. How the hell did Michael Myers survive? Now for this example I mainly want to focus at the end of Halloween 2 and the beginning of Halloween 4. Now obviously at the very end of the very first Halloween, Michael Myers gets shot 6 times in the torso and then falls off a balcony. Dr. Loomis goes to see and his body has completely disappeared. Halloween 2 then picks up the same night where Michael has followed Laurie to the hospital to kill her. Now I can accept that Michael Myers got shot 6 times in the chest and fell off a balcony. The chances of someone surviving that are incredibly low, but I would say are somewhat possible, and by the end of that night, he was most likely going to bleed out. But the problem is, at the very end of Halloween 2, Dr. Loomis blows himself and Michael up. At the very end of the movie, we see Michael's charred body walking out of the room and then dropping to the ground, and he's done. Now, at the beginning of Halloween 4, 10 years later, it explains that Michael Myers has spent those 10 years wrapped up in a bed in a coma. Okay, but how did he survive that explosion after getting shot a whole bunch of times in the chest and then falling off a balcony? It makes absolutely no sense. Now I know some Halloween fans are probably watching this saying, well, Michael is pure evil and he's not really human. Okay, but that's never really explained in the movies. It's heavily implied and it wants the audience to think, is this person a being of pure evil or is he just a psychopath? But we never get a definitive answer that yes, he is a supernatural being. So as far as we all know, Michael is indeed human. He got shot a whole bunch of times mid-torso and then got blown up. But then some people might say, well, this happened in a hospital, and after the police and first responders showed up, they took care of Laurie, extinguished Michael, and then saved his life. Okay, but why would they want to do this? Michael Myers is a mass murderer. He has killed several teenagers and hospital staff in one night. Why on earth would these people take their time and effort to save the life of a murderer who's on fire, there is no way he can have any sort of quality of life after that, and then keep him sustained in a coma for 10 years? It makes no sense. Now, I know the real-life answer as to why they kept bringing Michael back. Halloween 3 did not have Michael in it, and it was a financial failure. And then for Halloween 4, when they did bring him back, it was a financial success. So that makes total sense. But in the Halloween universe, there isn't a doctor, a paramedic, or a cop on this planet who would save his sorry ass. But now let's get into the Rob Zombie Halloween remakes. At the end of his first movie, Halloween, Michael gets once again shot a whole bunch of times, Laurie and Michael fall off a balcony together, and Laurie ends up sitting on Michael's chest with a gun. She then takes aim and blows his goddamn brains out, her face gets splattered with blood, and that's how the movie ends. And that's how this franchise was supposed to end. Rob Zombie only wanted to do one Halloween movie. But then 2 years later, we got Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. And in this sequel, Michael Myers is alive and well after taking a bullet to the face and no one bothers explaining how he possibly survived. Now, I know at the very beginning of the movie, it has Michael chasing Laurie through a hospital, and it shows him just kind of getting up in the back of an ambulance. But it revealed that that was actually just a dream sequence. So did that actually happen? And if so, once again, how did he survive taking a bullet to the face? Now, some people may say that when Laurie shot him, we don't actually see him take it in the face. We just see her getting splattered with blood. So maybe Michael Myers got shot somewhere in the upper body? But still, when you see Michael Myers' mask in the sequel, there's a giant hole in the face, heavily implying that's where he got blasted. So how the hell did he survive? Now, I know in real life when Rob Zombie did his remake of Halloween, it was intended to just be a one-off movie. He had no intentions of turning this into a whole new franchise for the Halloween series. But those scumbag Weinsteins really wanted to do that, especially since the first Halloween movie made so much money. Then, of course, those scumbags then strong-armed Rob Zombie into making a sequel, and I guess when he was doing it, he was just like, well, I never intended there to be a sequel, so I guess we'll just have Michael Myers back, and we won't say anything, and hope that no one won't notice. I'm not saying that's a bad part on him. I mean, this movie was never supposed to exist. So he was just like, fuck it, let's just bring Michael back for no reason. Okay, let's move past Halloween and go on to another very long-lasting horror franchise. Friday the 13th. Now, everybody knows Friday the 13th is about the hockey mask-wearing Jason going around killing teenagers and camp counselors at Camp Crystal Lake. It's a pretty basic story. But my question is, what exactly happened to Jason? So for those of you who are not familiar with Friday the 13th, I will give you a very basic outline of the lore so you can get caught up. In the 1950s, Jason was a deformed little boy who lived with his mother. His mother then got a job for Camp Crystal Lake to be the cook for the summer camp, and she took Jason along with her so the little boy can be looked over between her and the camp counselors. One day, some of the camp counselors decided to get a little frisky and not pay attention to the kids. The kids then bullied Jason and threw him in the lake, where he drowned. The following year, the camp was then reopened, but someone started murdering the camp counselors. That caused Camp Crystal Lake to shut down for good. But 30-some-odd years later, the camp reopened with new camp counselors, and the murders began again. It turned out to be Jason's mom wreaking her grisly revenge on all the camp counselors who she blames for the death of her son. Then, in Friday the 13th Part 2, it turns out that Jason is alive, he's a fully grown man now, and he is taking his revenge out on those he blames for the death of his mother. So after Jason drowned in the 50s, what happened to his body? Did the police show up and try to drag the lake, and they couldn't find it, and they were just like, whatever man, couldn't find the body, good luck Mrs. Voorhees. Granted, I can understand why that would drive Mrs. Voorhees insane, but that still doesn't explain what happened to Jason. Did he just end up washing ashore on Camp Crystal Lake, and he just wandered into the woods and survived? I mean, I guess so, but that's never really explained in the movies. It's just, Jason is alive. Now, some of you are saying that Jason is like a zombie killer, but that's not true until Part 6. Up until then, Jason is a flesh and blood mortal. He was just living as some outdoor survivalist recluse out in the woods. But my big question is, after they couldn't find his body, did everyone just shrug their shoulders and move on? Because it kind of seems like that. You would think after a little kid drowned and they couldn't find the body, they would do a bit more of an investigation. And because of all these inconsistencies, it has led me to come up with this theory, that all of the killers in the Friday the 13th movies were never actually Jason Voorhees. In the 1950s, when Jason drowned in the lake, that was it. They did do an investigation, but for one reason or another, they just couldn't find his body. And then after he died, when the murder started happening, a huge urban legend came around Camp Crystal Lake and Jason Voorhees. Then, in the following movies, all of the other killers were from a group of backwoods hillbillies who've been living in and around Camp Crystal Lake. Now, I know this theory doesn't exactly hold up, and it lends a lot to coincidence, but it makes a lot more sense than a little kid drowning in a lake, then somehow washing ashore, and then surviving by himself for over 30 years, to come back to Crystal Lake to just happen to see his mom get decapitated by a camp counselor, which then made him start doing his whole revenge killing for camp counselors. It's a lot to think about, especially later in the series after Jason becomes a zombie, and then in part 7 there's this other dead guy in the lake, and then when you get to part 9 you get the Necronomicon involved, and then you get Freddy's glove at the end of that movie, then you get Freddy versus Jason. All of this shit really just makes my head hurt, and it really leads to a lot of inconsistencies in this movie series. Alright, so I just took a couple aspirin and I'm done talking about Friday the 13th. Now let's talk about another series of films that I absolutely love, the Final Destination movies. So for those of you who have never seen the Final Destination movies, I will give you a basic overview on how things usually play out in these movies. So you have a group of people who are supposed to die in some sort of tragic accident. For example, in the first movie it was a plane crash, and in the second movie it was a big highway pileup. However, someone who's supposed to die in that crash ends up having a premonition, which then causes them to save themselves and several other people who are supposed to die in that event. After all these people survive these horrible incidents, they all mysteriously start dying off one by one. It turns out that death cannot be cheated, and the Grim Reaper has a designed plan for all of us. And now that all of these people escaped their time of death, he has to go around and clean them all up. So my question is, if death has a designed plan for every single one of us, and we are all supposed to die at a specific time, at a specific place, and that's just the way it is, then why do so many people keep having premonitions? So clearly in the Final Destinations universe, there are higher powers at work, as in death has indeed a designed plan for every single one of us. But if there is higher powers at work and there is a designed plan, then why are people getting premonitions? I don't understand. Is there another force out there that are giving people all of these premonitions and visions that are allowing them to escape death? But if they're escaping death, they just end up dying shortly after anyway, because death needs to follow his list. So what is causing these premonitions to happen? Now, some people might think that there is some sort of good force in the universe that is giving these people the premonitions that are allowing them to escape a horrific death. But the problem is, these people are not escaping a horrific death. They're just going to suffer a probably even worse death shortly after they have escaped that one. And not to mention, this is not a good versus evil thing. The Grim Reaper is not an evil force in the universe. He's not the devil. People are supposed to die, and the Grim Reaper is just taking us to that point. So that theory doesn't exactly make sense. The only other theory I can personally think of is that death is trying to test himself. He is the one giving these people premonitions, and then seeing how quickly he can mop up after his supposed mistake. That doesn't make a lot of sense, but in this universe of the Final Destination movies, possibly that's the best explanation I can come up with, because other than that, I don't understand why people are given premonitions to escape death's design just to die like a few days later. Were any of you guys confused by these inconsistencies the way I was, or were there giant plot points that I just totally missed? Please leave me a comment down below. I would love to know. I'm sure other horror fans would love to know too. Also, are there any other weird inconsistencies in horror franchise that you guys know about? Also leave that down in the comments. And now, like my past Halloween videos, it is time for another horror movie recommendation. And this movie is called Grave Encounters, and you can find it on Amazon Prime. Now, I don't want to give away too much of the plot, but it centers around a paranormal investigation television show that goes to a supposedly haunted insane asylum, and things go to hell very quickly. And one more thing I will say is that the ending is super disturbing. The night I watched this, it kept me up thinking about it for a little bit. So definitely check it out. That movie again is called The Grave Encounters. So that's it for today's video. If you like what you saw, don't forget to like and subscribe, leave me a comment letting me know what you thought of today's video, checking out some of my past videos, and sharing them with a few of your friends while you're at it. If you would like to keep up with me on a more daily basis, you can follow me on Facebook and on Instagram. I also have patches for sale, so if you would like to get your very own, you can click right over here. There's also a link down in the description. Overall, thank you very much for watching, guys, and don't forget to stay spooky.